My name is Violet, and I'm 32 years old. I never thought my father's retirement dinner would become the most painful night of my life. The elegant Manhattan restaurant was filled with his colleagues and friends, all celebrating his successful career. Despite our strained relationship, I hoped this milestone might finally bring us closer. As he stood up to give his speech, champagne glass raised high, I felt a flutter of anticipation. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight he would finally see me. I had no idea that evening would change everything forever. Before I continue with the most painful moment of my life, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe that sometimes our deepest wounds can become the beginning of our greatest healing. Growing up as the daughter of Walter Reynolds meant living in the shadow of excellence. My father wasn't just successful, he was legendary in the financial world. As the CEO of Reynolds Financial Group, he had transformed a modest company into a Wall Street powerhouse. His reputation for ruthless precision and unwavering standards extended beyond his office and into our home. I work as a mid-level marketing executive at a boutique advertising agency in New York. It's a respectable career by most standards, but in my father's eyes it was merely evidence of my lack of ambition. What he never understood was my passion for art that I kept alive through late-night painting sessions in my small home studio. I had dreamed of pursuing art professionally since childhood, but his disapproval had steered me toward a practical career instead. My husband Noah has been my rock through everything. At 36, he's a brilliant software engineer who creates innovative solutions for accessibility issues. We met 5 years ago at a charity event, and he was the first person who truly saw me beneath the layers of insecurity my father had instilled. Noah encouraged my artistic pursuits and hung my paintings proudly in our apartment, even when I was too afraid to show them to anyone else. Your father doesn't understand that success isn't measured by the size of your paycheck. Noah would tell me, his brown eyes full of conviction. True success is using your talents to create something meaningful. James, my older brother at 36, embodied everything my father valued. As a corporate lawyer at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms, he followed directly in our father's footsteps. His office walls were covered with awards and recognitions, each one earning an approving nod from our father. "You could learn something from your brother's work ethic," my father would say at family gatherings, not even trying to hide the comparison. "He understands what it takes to build a legacy." Ashley. My 34-year-old sister was equally golden in our father's eyes. As a cardiothoracic surgeon, she saved lives and garnered respect in a challenging field. Her schedule was relentless, but she always made time for family dinners where my father would beam with pride as she discussed her latest successful procedure. "Ashley has always known exactly what she wanted," my father would say, glancing pointedly at me. "She never wasted time on frivolous pursuits." The difference in how my father treated us couldn't have been more stark. While James and Ashley received congratulatory calls and expensive gifts for their achievements, my accomplishments went unnoticed. When I was promoted at work, my father merely nodded and changed the subject. When I won a local art competition under a pseudonym, I didn't even tell my family, knowing my father would dismiss it as a hobby. Walter Reynolds expected nothing less than excellence, but his definition of excellence was narrow and unyielding. My creative mind and artistic talents weren't valuable currencies in his world. He wanted another lawyer, another doctor, another financial wizard. Instead, he got me someone who saw beauty where he saw impracticality. My mother, Margaret, was a gentle soul trapped in a marriage where her voice had been systematically silenced over 35 years. Once a promising pianist, she had given up her music to support my father's career and raise us children. I often caught her looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and recognition, seeing in me the same creative spirit she had once possessed. "Your father means well," she would whisper after particularly harsh criticisms. "He just wants you to have a secure future." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She knew the damage being done but lacked the strength to stop it. The criticism began early. When I chose to attend a liberal arts college instead of an Ivy League university like my siblings, my father refused to attend my graduation. When I accepted my first job in advertising, he spent an entire dinner explaining how I was settling for mediocrity. When I married Noah, my father gave a wedding toast that focused more on hoping Noah would inspire me to greater ambitions than on celebrating our love. Every family gathering became a battlefield where I armored myself against inevitable disappointment. I learned to speak less about my work, my dreams, my life. I became a ghost in my own family, present but unseen. When my mother called about my father's retirement dinner, my first instinct was to decline the invitation. "He probably won't even notice if I'm not there," I told Noah as we sat on our small balcony overlooking the city. "That's exactly why you should go," Noah replied, taking my hand. "Not for him, but for you. You've spent your whole life hoping for his approval. Maybe it's time to stop hoping and start accepting that his limitations aren't yours." My mother's plea eventually convinced me. "Please, Violet. It would mean so much to me to have all my children there. It's an important night for our family." The resignation in her voice suggested she knew what she was asking for me to once again subject myself to my father's dismissal. So I agreed, clinging to a fragile hope that retirement might soften my father. Perhaps without the pressures of his career, he might finally see me. It was a dangerous hope, one that had been crushed many times before, but hope is often the last thing to die in a wounded heart. I bought a new dress for the occasion, a sophisticated navy blue sheath that made me feel confident and professional. Noah complimented me as we got ready, but his eyes held concern. He knew better than anyone the toll these family events took on me. "Remember, I'll be right beside you all night," he promised, straightening his tie. "We'll face this together." I nodded, appreciating his support, but knowing that some battles can never truly be shared. The wound of a parent's rejection is uniquely personal, a private pain that even the most loving partner can never fully understand. As we headed to the restaurant that evening, I practiced my smile in the cab's reflection. It was the same smile I'd perfected over years of family dinners and holiday gatherings, bright enough to be appropriate, restrained enough to avoid drawing attention. Tonight would be no different, I told myself. I would play my part in the family performance and then return to the safety of my real life with Noah. If only I had known how wrong I was. The Grand Plaza restaurant overlooked Central Park, its floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering Manhattan skyline as twilight descended. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the private dining room, where nearly 100 of New York's financial elite had gathered to celebrate my father's retirement. The air was heavy with expensive perfume and the distinctive scent of power and privilege. I gripped Noah's hand tightly as we entered, scanning the room for familiar faces. My father stood near the bar, surrounded by admirers, his silver hair and tailored suit, giving him the distinguished appearance of a man who had conquered the world. He didn't look in our direction. "There are your brother and sister," Noah whispered, nodding toward a corner where James and Ashley were engaged in animated conversation with a group of my father's partners. They looked perfectly at home in this environment, their posture and expressions mirroring our father's confident demeanor. My mother spotted us and hurried over, her face lighting up. "Violet, Noah, I'm so glad you made it." She embraced me, holding on a moment longer than necessary. When she pulled back, I noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her pearl necklace, a gift from my father on their 30th anniversary. "Your father will be pleased you're here." The doubt must have shown on my face because she quickly added, "He will, deep down." We made our way through the crowd, stopping occasionally to exchange pleasantries with family friends and my father's colleagues. Each conversation followed a predictable pattern. "Ah, you must be Walter's youngest. James and Ashley have told us all about their work. What do you do, dear?" And then the barely concealed disappointment when I explained my role in marketing, followed by the inevitable pivot. "How interesting. Did you know your brother just won the Chambers Award for corporate law?" By the time we reached the bar, I was already emotionally exhausted. Noah ordered us both a glass of wine, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back. Violet Reynolds, is that you? The voice belonged to Dr. Frank Simmons, an old family friend who had known me since childhood. Unlike many of my father's associates, Dr. Simmons had always shown genuine interest in all three Reynolds children equally. Dr. Simmons, it's so good to see you, I said, genuinely pleased to find a friendly face. Please, it's just Frank tonight, he said, embracing me warmly. I've been following your career through your mother. She tells me you're doing remarkable work with that new sustainable products campaign. The fact that my mother had shared this detail and that Frank had remembered it touched me deeply. Your mother also mentioned you still paint, he continued, lowering his voice slightly. I always thought you had extraordinary talent. What a shame your father never... He trailed off, seeming to realize he'd ventured into sensitive territory. Well, I've always believed there are many paths to a meaningful life. Your father sees the world through a particular lens, but that doesn't mean his view is the only correct one. As Frank excused himself to greet another guest, I caught my father's gaze from across the room. His expression remained impassive, but there was a chill in his eyes as they flicked from me to Frank and back again. He gave a barely perceptible nod before turning his attention elsewhere. He saw you, Noah whispered. That's something. A nod isn't exactly a warm welcome, I replied, taking a larger sip of wine than I intended. We made our way to our assigned table, strategically placed at the periphery of the room, far from the head table where my father would sit. James and Ashley were already seated at a more prominent table with their respective partners alongside my father's closest associates. Classic Walter Reynolds seating arrangement, Noah muttered under his breath, making sure everyone knows exactly where they stand in the hierarchy. Before I could respond, Ashley approached our table, her surgeon's posture perfect as always. Violet, Noah, good to see you both. Her smile seemed genuine, but there was an undercurrent of tension in her voice. Dad's in rare form tonight. He's already made 3 associates cry with his reminiscences about their early mistakes. Some things never change, I said, attempting to keep my tone light. Ashley glanced around before leaning closer. Listen, Violet, I know things have always been complicated between you and Dad, but tonight's important to him. Try not to take anything personally, okay? The familiar request, don't react, don't challenge, don't disrupt the carefully orchestrated image of the Reynolds family, stung more than it should have after all these years. When have I ever made a scene, Ashley? I asked quietly. She had the grace to look embarrassed. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant... She trailed off as James approached. The prodigal sister returns, James said with a smirk that matched our father's. Didn't think you'd show up tonight, Violet. Figured you'd be too busy with one of your creative projects. The way he said creative made it sound like a character flaw. Noah straightened beside me, but I placed a calming hand on his arm. I wouldn't miss it, James. Family comes first, remember? The irony wasn't lost on any of us. James had the decency to look slightly ashamed. Right, well, Dad's about to start the formal part of the evening. Speeches, toasts, the usual. Mom insisted he acknowledge all the family during his speech, so... He shrugged, leaving the implication hanging in the air. Don't expect much. As my siblings returned to their table, Noah squeezed my hand under the table. You okay? I'm fine. I lied, a skill perfected over decades of Reynolds family gatherings. The room gradually quieted as the waitstaff began filling champagne flutes for the toast. My father stood at the head table, commanding attention without saying a word, a talent he had honed over 40 years in corporate boardrooms. My mother sat beside him, her face a careful mask of wifely pride. As the last glass was filled, my father looked around the room, his gaze touching on familiar faces, lingering on James and Ashley with unmistakable pride. His eyes skipped over me entirely as he raised his glass. Tonight marks not an ending, but a transition, he began, his voice strong and confident. After 43 years at Reynolds Financial, I leave knowing that what we built together will continue to thrive. The room was utterly silent, hanging on his every word. I felt a flutter of hope in my chest, dangerous and familiar. Perhaps tonight, in this moment of reflection and celebration, he would find something kind to say about his third child. They say a man's legacy is measured not by what he accumulates, but by what he leaves behind. My father continued, I've been fortunate enough to leave behind both a thriving company and a family that embodies everything I value. His gaze swept around the room again, and this time, just for a moment, it landed on me. Something unreadable flickered across his face before he looked away. In that moment, balanced on the knife edge between hope and experience, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, tonight would be different. I couldn't have been more wrong. A man is lucky if his work leaves the world better than he found it. My father continued, his voice resonating through the hushed room. But a man is truly blessed if his children carry forward the principles and excellence he has tried to instill. He gestured towards the room at large, including his business associates and friends. Many of you have been with me since the beginning. You've seen Reynolds Financial grow from a small firm to an industry leader. You've weathered market crashes and celebrated bull markets alongside me. For that loyalty and excellence, I am eternally grateful. My father paused, taking a sip of champagne. The room remained captivated, all eyes fixed on the man who had built an empire through sheer determination and uncompromising standards. But tonight, I want to speak about another kind of legacy. One more personal and ultimately more meaningful. He turned slightly, his gaze settling on James and Ashley. My children represent everything I've worked for beyond the boardroom. The values of excellence, determination, and meaningful contribution. James sat straighter, basking in the approval. Ashley smiled demurely, though I could see the pride radiating from her. My mother watched my father with the practiced admiration of decades, though something wistful lingered in her eyes. James, my father continued, has become one of the most respected corporate attorneys in New York, defending business interests with the same passion and integrity I've always tried to demonstrate. He raised his glass slightly in James's direction. And Ashley has literally held human hearts in her hands, saving lives with the precision and excellence that defines true greatness. The room murmured appreciatively. I felt Noah's hand tighten around mine beneath the table. We both knew what was coming, or rather, what wasn't coming. There would be no mention of the third Reynolds child, no acknowledgement of my existence or contributions. It was a familiar exclusion, but it stung nonetheless. But then my father surprised me. Family has always been the foundation of everything I've built, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. The motivation behind every long night at the office, every difficult decision, every sacrifice. For a brief, wild moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Perhaps tonight, in front of all these witnesses, he would finally acknowledge me as well. Perhaps retirement had softened something in him, opened his eyes to the narrowness of his vision. My father raised his glass higher, and in that suspended moment I allowed myself to believe. And so tonight, I want to toast to the true measure of my success, he said, voice ringing with emotion I rarely heard from him. My real children are the ones who made me proud, the ones who understood what truly matters in this world, and rose to meet the standards set before them. Applause erupted around the room. James and Ashley beamed. I sat frozen, the words landing like physical blows. My real children. As if there were some children who weren't real. As if I were somehow fictional, a footnote, rather than a chapter in the Reynolds family story. The applause continued as my father soaked in the adoration. Then, as the clapping began to subside, his eyes found mine across the room. The contact was deliberate, unmistakable. His expression hardened, and with absolute clarity, he spoke the words that would forever divide my life into before and after. You can leave. 3 simple words spoken loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Not shouted, not emotional, delivered with the same decisive tone he might use to dismiss an underperforming employee. The tables around us fell silent, the awkward quiet spreading outward like ripples in a pond. My lungs seemed to collapse, unable to draw breath. The room tilted slightly, the chandelier lights blurring as tears threatened. I became acutely aware of every sensation, the rough texture of the tablecloth under my fingertips, the distant clink of silverware from tables where people pretended not to have heard the weight of dozens of eyes suddenly looking anywhere but at me. Through the roaring in my ears, I heard scattered whispers, saw faces displaying emotions ranging from embarrassment to pity, to barely concealed curiosity. A few of my father's younger associates even smirked, perhaps recognizing the ruthless dismissal that had made Walter Reynolds legendary in business. My mother's face had gone pale, her hand covering her mouth, but she remained seated beside my father, years of acquiescence holding her in place. James looked down at his plate, discomfort evident in his rigid posture. Ashley stared at our father in apparent shock, as if this public rejection had crossed a line even she hadn't anticipated. Somehow, I found the strength to stand. My legs felt disconnected from my body, operating on some primitive instinct to escape. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry, wouldn't confirm his lifelong assessment that I was too emotional, too sensitive for the Reynolds name. I placed my napkin on the table with shaking hands and prepared to walk away from not just the dinner, but likely any future attempt at a relationship with my father. This moment of public humiliation had crystallized what I had known but denied for years. There was no earning his love, no measuring up to his impossible standard. I was, and would always be, the disappointment he couldn't acknowledge. As I pushed my chair back, preparing for the longest walk of my life through the silent restaurant, I felt movement beside me. Noah stood his chair, scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He placed his napkin deliberately on the table and took my hand, interlacing our fingers firmly. The gesture was simple but profound, a public declaration that where I went, he went too, that I wasn't alone. My father's expression shifted from dismissive to annoyed. This clearly wasn't part of his script for the evening. Noah's action had transformed my humiliating exit into something else entirely, a choice rather than a banishment. "Sit down," my father said sharply to Noah. "This doesn't concern you." The room held its collective breath. Noah, typically gentle and conflict-averse, drew himself up to his full height. His voice, when it came, was clear and steady, carrying easily across the now silent restaurant. "With all due respect, Mr. Reynolds," he began, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand, "anything that concerns Violet absolutely concerns me." The silence that followed Noah's declaration was absolute. Every eye in the room fixed on my husband, many widening in surprise at his audacity. No one challenged Walter Reynolds, certainly not at his own retirement dinner, and definitely not in defense of the child he had just publicly dismissed. My father's face darkened, a familiar storm gathering. "Young man, you're making a scene at a private family matter. You made it public the moment you chose to humiliate your daughter in front of 100 people." Noah replied, his voice remaining steady despite the slight tremor I could feel in his hand. "For years I've watched Violet strive for your approval, bend herself into shapes that hurt her soul, all to earn a fraction of the love you so freely give her siblings." My father glanced around uncomfortably, clearly not expecting his carefully orchestrated evening to veer so dramatically off script. "This is hardly the time or place." "It's exactly the time and place," Noah interrupted something I'd never seen anyone do to my father. "You chose this moment to publicly reject your daughter. I'm choosing this moment to publicly recognize the extraordinary woman you failed to see." He turned slightly to address the room, still holding my hand firmly. "For those who only know Violet as Walter's daughter, let me tell you about the woman I know. A woman whose creative mind has developed marketing campaigns that have revitalized struggling businesses. A woman who stays up nights, helping colleagues with projects without taking credit. A woman who volunteers teaching art to underprivileged children every Saturday morning." My father tried to interject, signaling to a staff member near the door, presumably for security. That's enough. Both of you leave now. Noah continued as if he hadn't heard. Did you know that the Carson account, the one your company proudly touts as a major acquisition, initially approached Reynolds Financial because of a connection Violet nurtured? Or that when your company needed a rebranding 3 years ago, Violet anonymously contributed design concepts through her mother because she knew you'd dismiss them coming directly from her? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw several of my father's colleagues exchange glances, pieces falling into place. My mother looked stricken, realizing Noah was revealing confidences she had kept. You have no idea what you're talking about, my father snapped, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Noah responded. I'm talking about a woman who has spent her entire life being told she wasn't enough by the one person whose approval she craved most. And yet, instead of becoming bitter, she's channeled that pain into compassion for others who feel unseen. From the corner of my eye, I noticed James shift uncomfortably in his seat. Ashley was watching Noah with an unreadable expression, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. My father made a dismissive gesture. Emotional appeals don't change facts. Success speaks for itself, and success, Noah's voice took on an edge I'd rarely heard. Is success only measured by titles and income brackets? Because if that's your metric, sir, you've failed spectacularly at the most important job you've ever had, being a father to all your children. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Someone gasped. My father's face flushed with anger. How dare you? You know nothing about my relationship with my children. Noah reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out what I recognized as a small stack of cards and letters. Actually, I know quite a bit. I know that while you were dismissing Violet's contributions to your company, others were recognizing them. He held up the papers. These are thank you notes from your colleagues, Mr. Reynolds. People in this very room who reached out to Violet for help over the years, help she freely gave without ever telling you because she knew you'd somehow use it to diminish her further. My father strode forward, attempting to snatch the papers from Noah's hand. This is preposterous. Give me those. They're not addressed to you, Noah said firmly, moving the papers out of reach. They're addressed to your daughter, the one you just told to leave, the one who has been contributing to your success in ways you've been too blind to see. A movement to my right caught my attention. Ashley had risen from her seat and was walking purposefully toward us. My heart sank, assuming she was coming to support our father and help escort us out. Instead, she stopped beside me and after a moment's hesitation took my other hand. Noah's right, Dad, she said, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. I've always known it, but I was too much of a coward to say anything. Ashley's support stunned me as much as it clearly shocked our father. My sister, who had always carefully navigated the family dynamics to maintain her favored status, was taking a public stand beside me. What are you doing, Ashley? My father demanded, his voice sharpening with betrayal. Ashley squared her shoulders, her surgeon's confidence evident as she addressed not just our father but the entire room. Something I should have done years ago. Supporting my sister. She turned to me, her eyes filled with regret. 2 years ago, when I was struggling through my divorce and questioning my ability to continue my surgical residency, you were there for me, Violet. You let me stay in your apartment for 3 weeks. You made sure I ate. You listened without judgment when everyone else, including Dad, told me I needed to power through and not let personal problems affect my career. This revelation caused a stir among the guests. My father's tight smile faltered. This was clearly news to him. Ashley had told our parents she was staying with a colleague during that difficult time. You never told me that, my father said, confusion momentarily replacing anger. Because you would have seen it as weakness, Ashley replied simply. In both of us. A movement from the other side of the room drew everyone's attention. James was making his way toward our growing family standoff. My heart raced, wondering which side of this increasingly public divide my brother would choose. James hesitated, glancing between our father's thunderous expression and the three of us standing together. I could almost see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of family loyalty against professional consequences of truth against comfort. After what seemed an eternity, he took a deep breath and came to stand beside Ashley. "There's something else you should know, Dad," James said, his lawyer's voice steady, despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. "Remember the Westfield merger speech, the one that got me noticed by the senior partners?" Our father nodded curtly, clearly struggling to maintain composure as his perfectly orchestrated evening continued to unravel. "Violet wrote most of it," James admitted. "I was drowning in preparation for the case and couldn't focus on the speech. Violet stayed up all night helping me craft something that sounded authentic to me, but had the impact I needed." Whispers rippled through the crowd. My father's business associates exchanged glances, reevaluating their understanding of the Reynolds family dynamic. "Why wasn't I told about this?" my father demanded. "Because you've made it very clear what you think about Violet's abilities," James replied. "I knew you'd discount the speech if you knew she had a hand in writing it." Before my father could respond, another voice spoke up from the crowd. "If we're sharing stories about Violet's contributions, I have one." The speaker was Edward Thompson, my father's oldest business partner. "Walter, remember when we were losing the Nakamura account 5 years ago? You came up with that innovative presentation approach that saved the relationship." My father nodded stiffly, clearly unsure where this was going. "That wasn't your idea," Thompson continued. "Margaret shared a concept that Violet had mentioned during a family dinner. Margaret knew you wouldn't listen if it came from Violet directly, so she presented it as a casual thought of her own. You seized on it, developed it, and took full credit." My mother gasped softly, her hand flying to her throat. She hadn't known that Edward had figured out the true source of the idea. Thompson turned to me with genuine respect in his eyes. "That approach became our standard client retention strategy, young lady. It saved countless accounts over the years." The revelations continued as other guests found their courage. A marketing director mentioned how I had helped him develop a campaign when his job was on the line. An executive assistant thanked me for coaching her through a difficult presentation. Each story revealed a pattern. I had consistently supported my father's business and associates, from the shadows, never seeking recognition, knowing it would be denied. Throughout these revelations, my father's expressions cycled through disbelief, anger, and confusion. His carefully constructed narrative that I was the disappointing child who had never contributed meaningfully to the Reynolds legacy was crumbling before his eyes. As the stories continued, I felt a shift in the room's energy. What had begun as an uncomfortable scene at a retirement dinner had transformed into something else, a long overdue reckoning with truth. Walter Reynolds, master of controlling every situation, had lost control of this one. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. In the midst of this upheaval, a quiet voice spoke from behind my father. "I have something to say as well." The room fell silent as my mother rose from her seat. In 40 years of marriage, I had never seen her publicly contradict my father. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear. "Walter," she began, "for years, I've watched you dismiss our daughter's gifts because they didn't fit your narrow definition of success. I've been complicit in my silence, and for that, Violet, I am deeply sorry." Tears welled in my eyes as my mother walked slowly toward me. For the first time in my memory, she wasn't looking to my father for permission or approval. "What you don't know, Walter, what I never told you, is that Violet was offered a prestigious art scholarship to the Rhode Island School of Design during her senior year of high school." My father's head snapped toward me, genuine surprise in his eyes. "She turned it down," my mother continued, her voice gaining strength, "because I was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer that spring. While you were consumed with the Peterson acquisition, barely making it to my treatments, Violet deferred her dreams to stay close to home and help me through my recovery." The silence in the room was profound. My father looked as though he'd been struck. "By the time I was well, you had already convinced her that art was a waste of her potential. You never knew about the scholarship because she asked me not to tell you. She didn't want you to have one more reason to be disappointed in her. My mother reached us, completing our small family rebellion. She took my face in her hands, something she hadn't done since I was a child. I should have fought harder for you, my beautiful, talented girl. I should have made him see. The dam broke, and tears slid down my cheeks. Years of seeking validation, of quiet suffering, of believing I somehow deserved my father's dismissal, all of it cracked open in that moment of maternal recognition. Around us, the room had transformed. The polite society masks had dropped, revealing genuine emotion. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable with such raw family drama. Others watched with empathy, perhaps recognizing similar dynamics in their own families. My father stood alone now, the crowd having subtly shifted away from him. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Walter Reynolds appeared truly uncertain, the ground beneath his feet no longer solid. He looked at the four of us standing together, his wife, his son, his elder daughter, and me, the child he had dismissed, and something in his expression changed. Not softening exactly, but a crack in the absolute certainty that had defined him. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. I think we should continue this conversation privately. But it was too late for privacy. The truth had already been laid bare before witnesses. And for once, I wasn't the one who felt exposed and vulnerable in the Reynolds family drama. The power had shifted subtly but unmistakably, and we all knew it. The silence following my father's request for privacy stretched uncomfortably. The 100 guests who had come to celebrate Walter Reynolds' illustrious career were now unwilling witnesses to the unraveling of his carefully curated family image. "I believe you've already made this public, Dad," I said, finding my voice at last. Years of suppressed emotions gave my words a steadiness that surprised even me. "I've spent my entire life being invisible in this family. I won't go quietly into a private room to be dismissed again." The woman speaking these words felt like a stranger to me, confident, clear, unafraid. Perhaps she had always existed beneath the layers of self-doubt my father had cultivated. My father's jaw tightened. He gestured toward a side door. 5 minutes. Just the two of us." Noah squeezed my hand. "I'll be right here." I nodded and followed my father into a small private dining room adjacent to the main hall. The door closed behind us with a soft click, muting the buzz of conversation that had erupted in our wake. My father paced the small room, his retirement celebration imploding around him. For a man who had built his reputation on control and strategic thinking, this public family rebellion was unprecedented territory. "That was completely inappropriate," he began, his voice low and tense. "Airing family matters in front of my colleagues on tonight of all nights." "Inappropriate?" I repeated, incredulity rising. "You publicly told me to leave your celebration in front of everyone. What did you expect?" "I expected you to do what you've always done, leave quietly without making a scene." He ran a hand through his silver hair, a rare gesture of agitation. "That's the problem, Dad. I've always left quietly. I've always accepted your judgment. I've spent 32 years trying to earn your love, and tonight I finally realized it's not something I can earn. It's something you've chosen to withhold." He turned to face me. "This isn't about love. This is about standards, about living up to the Reynolds name. No, it's about your inability to see value in anything that doesn't mirror your own choices." The words poured out, decades of unspoken truth finally finding release. "I don't need you to think I'm brilliant or successful or impressive, Dad. I just needed you to accept that I'm your daughter, even if I'm different from what you wanted." My father's expression flickered with something I couldn't quite identify. "You think I don't know you're my daughter? Of course I do. But being my child comes with responsibilities, with expectations. That only apply to me, apparently." I cut in. "James and Ashley have your approval despite their divorces, despite their mistakes. They're allowed to be human. I'm only allowed to be perfect according to your specific definition of perfection." He waved a dismissive hand. "They've proven themselves in ways that Did you listen to anything that was just said out there? I demanded. I have contributed to this family, to your business, to my siblings' success. I've done it quietly without recognition, because that was the only way it would be accepted. My father fell silent, his practiced rebuttals momentarily exhausted. In the pause, I continued more softly. Do you know what hurts the most? It's not that you don't approve of my choices. It's that you've never once tried to understand them. You've never asked why I love art, why marketing fulfills me what I hope to create in the world. You decided who I should be before you ever knew who I am. Something shifted in my father's expression, not quite softening, but a small crack in the impenetrable facade. I pushed you because the world is hard, Violet. It doesn't reward dreamers and artists. I wanted security for you. No, I said gently. You wanted me to validate your own choices. Every time I chose differently, it felt like a rejection of your values. But Dad, I can admire your drive and determination without having to replicate your life. My father moved to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, the empire he had helped build, the world he understood. I don't know how to relate to you, he admitted so quietly, I almost missed it. James and Ashley. They speak my language. You've always been a mystery. I'm not a mystery, Dad. I'm just different. And different doesn't mean less valuable. We stood in silence for a moment, decades of misunderstanding hanging between us. Then Noah knocked softly and entered carrying a small wooden box I immediately recognized. I think you should show him, Noah said, placing the box in my hands. I hesitated, then nodded. This box contained vulnerability I wasn't sure I was ready to share, but perhaps it was time. What's this? My father asked. Every year on your birthday since I was 8, I've made you something. I explained, opening the box. Inside were dozens of small artworks, miniature paintings, sculptures, mixed media pieces, each carefully dated. I never gave them to you because I knew you'd see them as frivolous, but I made them anyway every year, hoping that someday I'd find the courage to share this part of myself with you. My father stared at the collection, momentarily speechless. He lifted out a small watercolor of his childhood home in Connecticut, rendered with surprising detail for a teenage artist. How did you know what it looked like? He asked, voice strangely rough. I've never taken any of you there. Grandma had a photo. I asked her about your childhood once, trying to understand you better. He examined a tiny bronze sculpture of hands, his hands recognizable by the distinctive signet ring he always wore. The craftsmanship was exquisite, capturing both strength and the barely perceptible tremor he'd developed in recent years. You see me, he said softly, almost to himself. All this time you were watching, noticing details. That's what artists do, Dad. We observe. We try to understand. We create meaning from what we see. He continued, looking through the box in silence. The door opened again and my mother entered, followed by James and Ashley. Walter, my mother said gently, your guests are waiting. People are confused. My father looked up, seeming almost surprised to remember the 100 people gathered to celebrate his career. For perhaps the first time in his life, Walter Reynolds had forgotten about appearances, about his public persona. Let them wait, he said, still holding the small sculpture of his hands. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to be truly seeing me for the first time. I've been wrong about you. The words weren't an apology, not exactly. From a man like my father, they were nonetheless extraordinary. An admission of error was almost unheard of in his vocabulary. Does this change anything? I asked, not quite ready to accept this small concession as healing for decades of rejection. I don't know, he answered honestly. I don't know how to start over at 65. You don't have to start over, I said. You just have to start from where we are. He nodded slowly, replacing the sculpture in the box with uncharacteristic gentleness. We should return to the dinner. I have some corrections to make to my earlier remarks. As we prepared to re-enter the main room, my father paused with his hand on the door. I may never fully understand your choices, Violet, but I was wrong to dismiss them and you so completely. It wasn't everything. It wasn't the warm embrace and full acceptance I had longed for since childhood. But in the complex language of Walter Reynolds, it was a beginning. A small bridge extending across a chasm that had seemed uncrossable for 32 years. Together we walked back into the room, our family alignment visibly different than when we had entered the evening. Whatever happened next, the truth had been spoken. And sometimes, truth is the foundation upon which healing can finally begin. The months following my father's retirement dinner brought changes I never could have anticipated. That night marked not an ending, but a beginning, difficult, awkward, and often painful, but a beginning nonetheless. My father returned to the podium that evening and did something unprecedented in his life. He publicly acknowledged he had been wrong. Not with flowery apologies or dramatic declarations, but in his own way, direct and unembellished. "I've spent 43 years building a company based on recognizing value and potential," he told the stunned room. "Tonight I've been reminded that I failed to apply those same skills to my own family, to my daughter Violet, who has contributed more than I've been willing to see." The correction didn't erase the earlier hurt, but it cracked open a door that had been sealed shut for decades. The weeks immediately after were difficult. Old patterns don't dissolve overnight, and my father struggled to relate to me without his familiar framework of criticism and disappointment. Our first attempts at conversation were stilted and uncomfortable, both of us navigating unfamiliar terrain. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me during an awkward lunch 3 weeks after the dinner. We sat at a small cafe near my office, both of us glancing at our watches too frequently. "About how I never asked why you love art." I nodded, unsure where this was heading. "So I'm asking now," he continued, his discomfort evident, but his effort genuine. "Why do you—" The question caught me off guard. I had spent so many years defending my choices that I'd rarely been asked to simply explain them. "Art helps me make sense of the world," I said finally. "When I create something, I'm not just making an object, I'm organizing my thoughts, processing emotions, finding patterns in chaos. It's like problem solving, but for the soul instead of the market." My father considered this, turning his coffee cup slowly. "I never thought of it that way," he admitted. "To me, it always seemed like a distraction from practical concerns." "It's the most practical thing I know," I replied. "It keeps me whole." He nodded, not fully understanding, but trying perhaps for the first time. That lunch was the first of many halting conversations. Some went better than others. Old habits resurfaced. My father would make a dismissive comment about my hobby. I would retreat into defensive silence, and we'd find ourselves back at our familiar impasse. But something had fundamentally shifted. Now, when we reached those moments, one of us would eventually break the pattern, usually me. Sometimes him, occasionally with prompting from my mother, who was finding her own voice in new and surprising ways. 6 months after the retirement dinner, my mother called me with unexpected news. "Your father has started seeing someone," she said, an unfamiliar excitement in her voice. "Mom, he's been married to you for 40 years, I replied, confused. She laughed. "Not that kind of someone. A therapist." The revelation stunned me. Walter Reynolds had always dismissed therapy as paying strangers to listen to complaints. The idea that he would voluntarily sit in a therapist's office seemed as improbable as him taking up skydiving. "It was his own decision," my mother continued. "He said he wanted to understand why he couldn't see you clearly all these years. He thinks it has something to do with his own father." The parallel had never occurred to me, but once mentioned it seemed obvious. My grandfather had been a hard man, a factory worker who viewed his son's interest in finance and business as putting on airs. He had wanted my father to take over his position at the factory, to remain in the working-class world he understood. My father had rebelled by becoming exactly what his father feared: educated, ambitious, white-collared. And I had rebelled against my father in my own way, choosing creativity over convention. We were more alike than either of us had realized, both pushing against the expectations placed upon us. My mother was changing too. After decades of deferring to my father, she was reclaiming parts of herself long set aside. She started playing the piano again tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. She joined a book club. She began expressing opinions at family gatherings without looking to my father first for approval. I enabled so much of his behavior, she told me over tea in my apartment. I thought I was being supportive, but I was really being complicit. You were doing what you knew how to do, I said, understanding her struggle with guilt. We both were, she replied, reaching for my hand. Including you, including your father. We were all doing what we thought was right, even when it was hurting each other. James and Ashley were navigating their own reckonings. The retirement dinner had exposed fault lines in our sibling relationships that couldn't be ignored. James called me one evening in a rare moment of vulnerability. I never stood up for you, he said without preamble when I answered. All those years I knew Dad was being unfair, but I never said anything. You were protecting yourself, I replied, understanding his position better than he might have expected. You found a way to gain Dad's approval. I can't blame you for holding on to that. I can blame myself, though, he said quietly. I valued his approval more than your pain. What kind of brother does that make me? A human one, I answered. We're all working with the tools we have, James. Our conversations became more frequent, more genuine. The carefully maintained facades began to crack, revealing the vulnerable humans beneath the Reynolds family armor. Ashley and I developed a closeness we'd never had before. She confessed that she had always envied my courage to pursue what I loved, even as she followed the path our father laid out. I became a surgeon because it would make Dad proud, she admitted during a weekend visit. Don't get me wrong, I love what I do now, but the initial choice wasn't really mine. You were always braver than me. It never felt like bravery, I told her. It felt like survival. I couldn't be anyone other than who I am, even when it cost me his love. You never lost his love, she said thoughtfully. You just lost his understanding. Those aren't the same thing. Her words stayed with me, offering a new lens through which to view the complicated relationship with my father. Perhaps love had always been present, just distorted beyond recognition by expectations neither of us could fulfill. Noah watched these family transformations with patient support, never saying, "I told you so," even though he had long insisted that honesty was the only path forward. His unwavering belief in me had been the foundation that allowed me to finally stand firm in my truth. 8 months after the retirement dinner, I took a leap I had been contemplating for years. I submitted my artwork to a small gallery under my real name, not the pseudonym I had hidden behind for so long. When they offered me a spot in an upcoming showcase for emerging artists, I sent invitations to my entire family. I didn't expect my father to come. Our relationship had improved, but art remained a point of tension between us. When the opening night arrived, I scanned the crowd for Noah, my mother, possibly my siblings, if they could make it. I was explaining one of my mixed media pieces to an interested couple when I felt a presence beside me. I turned to find my father standing awkwardly in a suit, studying the painting with intense concentration. I don't understand it, he said honestly, but it's compelling. The way these elements come together, it feels both chaotic and intentional. It was perhaps the most genuine thing he had ever said about my art, not pretending expertise, not dismissing it, but engaging with it on his own terms. That's exactly what I was trying to capture, I said, surprised by his insight. The tension between chaos and intention. He nodded, still examining the piece. I'm beginning to think that's what life is, finding the balance between what we can control and what we can't. He turned to me. You always understood that better than I did. I tried to control everything, including who you should be. The acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you for coming tonight, Dad. It means more than I can say. I'm trying, Violet, he said simply. I can't promise I'll ever fully understand your world, but I'm trying to see it through your eyes. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. There would still be misunderstandings, setbacks, moments when old wounds reopened. But something fundamental had shifted not just between my father and me, but within our entire family system. The Reynolds family was learning slowly and imperfectly that love isn't about molding others to meet our expectations. It's about seeing them for who they truly are and making room for their authentic selves in our lives. One year after the retirement dinner, we gathered for a family meal at my parents' home. As we sat around the table, I realized that the most profound change wasn't in any particular relationship, but in the energy between us all. The performance had ended. We were no longer playing the roles assigned to us: the successful son, the brilliant daughter, the disappointment. We were simply ourselves, complicated and flawed and real. My journey taught me that sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest teachers. My father's rejection had forced me to find validation within myself rather than from external sources. The pain had shaped me, but it didn't define me. True healing didn't come from finally gaining my father's approval. It came from no longer needing it to know my own worth. And perhaps that was the most valuable lesson of all, that we cannot wait for others to see our value before we claim it for ourselves. Today I teach art to children from underserved communities, helping them find their voices through creative expression. Many of them come from homes where their gifts are misunderstood or dismissed. In their eyes, I sometimes see my younger self hungry for validation, afraid their differences make them somehow wrong or deficient. Your uniqueness isn't a flaw, I tell them. It's your greatest strength. The world doesn't need more copies. It needs your original perspective. As I watch these children discover their own creative power, I'm reminded that healing isn't just about mending what's broken. It's about transforming our wounds into wisdom that can help others find their way. Sometimes our deepest injuries teach us our most important truths: that we are stronger than we know, that authenticity requires courage, and that the path to freedom often begins when we stop seeking approval and start living our truth. The scars remain, but they've become part of my story rather than my definition. And perhaps that's what healing truly means. Not the absence of pain, but the transformation of it into something that no longer has power over us.